One night, a black restaurant owner struggling to keep his business alive saw a grandmother and her young grandson shivering in the cold. He opened his doors, gave them warmth, and served them a hot meal. He never imagined that this simple act of kindness would begin a chain of events that changed everything. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. The neon sign of Carter's Kitchen flickered against the winter darkness, casting uneven shadows on the empty street below. Inside, Darius Carter sat hunched over a mountain of unpaid bills, his father's old knife lying beside the papers like a silent accusation. The red numbers seemed to multiply before his eyes: rent, utilities, suppliers who had stopped calling because they knew he had nothing left. "I've let you down, Pops," he whispered to the empty restaurant, picking up the worn blade that had fed 3 generations of families. "I've let this place die." The silence pressed down around him, broken only by the wheeze of an ancient refrigerator. Outside, snow began to fall on streets that rarely brought customers anymore. Fast food chains had slowly strangled his business until Carter's Kitchen stood like a monument to a dying way of life. Darius locked up and stepped into the bitter cold, wondering if tomorrow he'd still have keys to turn. At the corner of Beacon Avenue, 2 figures huddled against a brick wall under a threadbare blanket. An elderly woman clutched a small boy to her chest, both of them shivering in the wind that cut through their inadequate clothes. Darius slowed, recognizing something in their desperate embrace, the shape of people with nowhere left to go. "Grandma, I'm cold," the boy whispered, his voice thin as winter air. The words froze Darius in place. He stood staring at them, 2 souls abandoned by the world, clinging to each other as though their bond was the only thing left keeping them alive. Something inside him cracked. He had felt his own despair gnaw at him for months, but this was worse. He still had walls, a roof, 4 burners that still worked. These 2 had nothing. He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the ice, and spoke in a voice as gentle as he could manage. "You don't have to be out here tonight. I own that place, right there," he said, pointing back toward the flickering sign of Carter's Kitchen. "It's closed, but I can still make something hot for you. Both of you can come in, warm up." The woman's arms tightened around the boy, her chin lifting in defiance, suspicion flashing in her eyes. "We don't need charity," she murmured, her voice hoarse and proud. Darius exhaled slowly, his breath curling into the night air. He wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't charity, it was just human decency. But before he could, the boy stirred again, his wide eyes flicking between his grandmother and Darius, and this time his small voice carried a plea he couldn't hide. "Please, Grandma, I'm so cold." The woman's shoulders sagged, her resolve crumbling under the weight of that fragile voice. She gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Darius extended his arm and led them across the street. When he unlocked the door and pushed it open, the warmth of the restaurant spilled out, a thin refuge against the winter's bite. He guided them to a booth near the heater, then slipped into the kitchen. His hands moved without thought, chopping, stirring, heating broth, the rhythm of survival he knew too well. Minutes later he carried out 2 steaming bowls of soup. The boy's eyes lit up, his hands wrapping clumsily around the spoon, slurping greedily while the woman hesitated, then finally took a cautious sip. She closed her eyes, exhaling softly, and whispered, "It's good." Darius leaned against the counter, his chest easing for the first time that night, as he watched them eat. But when the bowls were empty and silence returned, he knew the truth: sending them back into the snow would be like sending them to their deaths. He cleared his throat, gesturing toward the back hallway. "There's a storage room behind the kitchen," he said quietly. "There's a couch, some blankets, not much, but it's warmer than the street. Stay here tonight." The woman looked up sharply, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her mouth opening as though to refuse. But the boy tugged her sleeve, eyes pleading. She swallowed hard, nodded once, and whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, Darius felt something stir inside him, not relief, not joy, but a fragile sense that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't failed at everything. Because sometimes the biggest home isn't 4 walls or a roof. Sometimes it's the heart of a man who has nothing left, yet still chooses to give. The morning light crept through the windows of Carter's Kitchen, falling across the tables and catching the edges of salt shakers and napkin holders. Outside, the street was quiet under a layer of snow. Inside, something was different. When Darius unlocked the door and stepped in, expecting the same dim, cluttered room he had left the night before, he froze. The place was spotless. Every chair was tucked neatly beneath the tables. The windows, once cloudy with smudges, gleamed in the weak sunlight. Even the counter, where bills had piled up like a curse, stood clear, the papers stacked in neat piles. The floor looked as though someone had scrubbed every inch. Darius stood at the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. This was not how he had left it. He set his keys down slowly, his rough fingers brushing against the counter, and listened. From the back room came the rustle of fabric and the faint voice of a child. He walked toward the storage room, his boots sounding heavy against the clean floor. When he pushed the door open, he saw them. The old woman was on her knees, folding rags with steady hands. Beside her, the boy sat on a stool, his small legs swinging, his head bent over a scrap of paper. The boy looked up the moment he saw Darius, his face lit up with joy. "Look," the boy cried, holding the paper out with both hands. "We cleaned everything. Grandma said if we're staying we should help, and I made a picture for you." The old woman rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. Her eyes met Darius's with a steadiness that carried both pride and defiance. "You gave us a roof," she said softly. "The least we could do is treat it with respect." Darius stepped closer and took the paper from the boy. It was a drawing of Carter's kitchen, but not the one he knew. The boy had imagined it alive again. The windows glowed with warm light, the door stood open, and the tables inside were full of people smiling as they ate. Above the door, a banner spelled out the name in uneven letters, Carter's Kitchen. In the corner, 3 small figures stood together at the entrance, a man, an old woman and a boy. For a moment Darius could not speak. The lump that had sat in his throat since last night pressed harder. He looked from the picture to the boy's hopeful eyes, then to the woman's lined face, waiting for judgment. But instead of irritation, he felt something different rising inside him. It was small, but it was real. He let out a slow breath, his voice rough when he finally spoke. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." The boy grinned wide, his chest puffing out as though he had just been given a medal. The old woman's lips curved faintly, as if she had not smiled in a long time. Darius turned quickly, reaching for a dish towel to cover the sting in his eyes. He busied himself at the counter, but inside, he felt a fragile ember of hope he had not felt in months. The moment was broken by a knock at the front door. It was not light or uncertain, but sharp and deliberate, making the glass rattle. Darius stiffened, his shoulders squaring. He tossed the towel aside and walked to the entrance. Through the window he saw a man standing in the cold, his coat collar pulled high, his breath fogging the glass. Darius opened the door. The man stepped inside without waiting, his eyes sweeping over the cleaned restaurant. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Looks cleaner than your books, Carter," he said, his voice mocking. "Funny how you can keep a floor shining, but not your accounts." Darius's jaw tightened, his grip on the door firm. He said nothing. Silence was the only defense he had. The man leaned closer, his smirk widening. 2 weeks, he said, his tone casual but his eyes hard. "Get me my money, or this place isn't yours anymore." He tapped his knuckle on the counter, turned and walked out. His boots crunched in the snow as the door swung shut behind him. Darius stood still, his breath shallow. The weight of the words pressed down on his chest. He looked at his hands and saw they were trembling. He clenched them, forcing the shaking to stop, but it wasn't only his hands, it was deeper than that. It was fear, shame, and anger all tangled together. Behind him, the old woman stepped into the doorway, her eyes sharp. She said nothing, but she had seen the way his fingers shook, the way his silence carried pain. The boy peeked out from behind her, his face pale with worry. "Who was that, Mr. Carter?" he asked softly. Darius turned to him quickly, forcing his face to soften. He crouched down and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice was steady, though it scraped in his throat. "Don't worry about it," he said quietly. "It's nothing you need to think about." The boy nodded, though his eyes searched Darius's face as if trying to understand. The old woman's gaze stayed fixed on him, heavy with unspoken truth, but she said nothing. Darius straightened, picked up the towel again, and turned back to the counter. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the smell of lemon and soap. Sunlight touched the clean tables, but the man's threat hung in the air, heavy and cold. On the counter lay the boy's drawing. The little figures stood in front of a bright Carter's kitchen, smiling as though nothing could break them. Darius stared at it, his lips pressed tight. He whispered, so softly only he could hear, "Not yet, kid. Not yet, because sometimes morning light does not erase the night. Sometimes it only reminds you how close the cold still lingers outside the door." The next morning, the air inside Carter's kitchen felt different. Darius stood behind the counter, staring at the neat stack of bills he had pushed aside again, his mind weighed down by the words of the man who had stood in his doorway the night before. 2 weeks, he had said. 2 weeks to pay back debts that Darius knew he could not cover. The trickle of customers who came in lately would never be enough. His eyes drifted to the counter, where Ethan's drawing still lay pinned beneath a salt shaker. In the boy's sketch, Carter's kitchen was alive again, full of people, the windows glowing. The vision of that future clung to him harder than the threat of losing everything. For the first time in weeks he asked himself, what if? He moved into the kitchen and began chopping and stirring. Soon the pans hissed, the smell of roasted chicken and cornbread filling the room. He prepared more food than he had in months, ignoring the voice in his head warning about wasted supplies. The old woman sat at a table, watching him. Her brows lifted. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. Darius set down the ladle and wiped his forehead. "If they won't come in here," he said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "we'll go out there." The woman tilted her head, her lips pressing together, but before she could respond, Ethan jumped up, his curls bouncing, his voice high with excitement. "You mean we're taking the food outside, like giving it away?" His eyes shone, his hands clasped tight as though he were holding on to something precious. "Free samples," Darius said firmly. "People walking by might stop, they might taste and remember what real food is supposed to be." He looked at Ethan, his tone softening. "And maybe a few will come back." By late morning, the three of them stood just outside the front doors. The sky was clear but the cold was sharp, every breath turning into a puff of smoke. Hours dragged by. Darius sat in a plastic chair, his clothes damp from snow, his hands clenched tight. The old woman sat beside him, clutching the envelope, silent tears streaming. When the doctor finally appeared, her voice was steady. "He'll be all right," she said. "Pneumonia, but we caught it in time. He'll need medication and a few days here." Relief collapsed through Darius. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The old woman placed a trembling hand on his arm. "You gave him everything," she whispered. "Your last chance to save the restaurant. You gave it all for him." Darius lifted his head, his eyes red but steady. "He's just a boy," he said. "He deserves a chance." They stayed by Ethan's bed through the night, taking turns watching him. By dawn his fever had broken, his breathing slow and peaceful. In the hallway the old woman sat beside Darius, her voice low. "I need to tell you who we are," she said. "Why we were on that street." Darius turned to her, waiting. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Watson. Ethan is my grandson. His mother, my daughter, died in a car accident 3 years ago. His father, he wasn't ready to raise him. He signed away his rights and left. I took Ethan in, but I was already struggling. I live on a fixed income. Medical bills piled up. When I couldn't pay rent anymore, they put us out." Her voice cracked. "I raised 5 children. Buried 2. Lost my husband to cancer. I thought I had endured everything. But watching Ethan go hungry, watching him shiver in doorways, that broke me in a way I didn't think possible." Darius felt his throat tighten. He reached over, covering her hand with his. "You're a good grandmother. Ethan knows you love him." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You treated him like your own. You gave up everything to save him. I've never seen that from a stranger." Her voice lowered. "You're the father he's never had, Darius. And I think, you need us as much as we need you." The truth of her words settled deep. For so long he had carried the weight of failure alone. His father's dream fading, the restaurant slipping away. But with these two he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A family. "When we get back," he said quietly. "No more storage room. There are 2 empty rooms above the restaurant. They're old but we can fix them. Make them real bedrooms. If you want to stay, if you want this to be home." Eleanor's face broke. Tears streamed freely as she nodded. She gripped his hand tight. From the hospital room came a small voice. "Grandma, is that you?" They both rushed in. Ethan was awake, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. He looked from his grandmother to Darius. "You came with me," he said softly. "You stayed." Darius knelt beside the bed, resting a hand on his forehead. "Of course I did, son. That's what family does." Ethan smiled faintly, the first real smile since falling ill. "Family," he whispered, testing the word. His brow furrowed. "But your restaurant, the man who came." Darius glanced at Eleanor. They both knew what waited at Carter's kitchen. The debt collector would return, and the money was gone. The restaurant would likely be lost. But as Darius looked at the boy, he realized something had changed. The restaurant had been his father's dream, but Ethan and Eleanor had given him something greater. "Don't worry about that," he told the boy, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out. Together. Because when a child's life is at stake, you don't weigh the cost. You act. And in that choice, you find who you really are." 3 days later they brought Ethan back to Carter's kitchen. The boy was still weak but recovering, his cheeks pale but his eyes bright with the strength only children seem to find. Eleanor had spent those hospital nights planning, and the moment they stepped inside she began turning the place into something that looked less like a restaurant, and more like a home. She moved with purpose, no longer the woman who had once huddled beneath a blanket on the street. She cleaned the upstairs rooms with careful hands, borrowed old furniture from neighbors, and hung curtains she had sewn from tablecloths. Ethan, too tired to run about, sat propped up on pillows, giving instructions like a little general. His drawings covered every surface. "The big room should be yours and Grandma's," he told Darius seriously. "And I want the small room with the window, so I can see people coming to eat." Darius smiled at his certainty, though in his heart he knew the truth. Word had spread through the neighborhood that Carter's kitchen was closing. The debt collector had made sure of that, preparing buyers for the day the restaurant would be taken away. That afternoon, while Eleanor tucked Ethan in for a nap, the knock came again. It was heavy, deliberate, the kind that carried authority. Darius opened the door to see the same man, this time flanked by 2 others. Their presence filled the entryway like a shadow. The lead man stepped inside without waiting, his mouth twisting into a grin. "Time's up, Carter," he said. "I hear you've been playing house instead of paying bills." Darius clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. Before he could answer, Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs. Her chin was lifted, her eyes clear, and she spoke before Darius could. "Mr. Carter doesn't have your money," she said firmly. The man laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "That much is obvious, so he'll be moving out, and we'll be moving in." He swept his hand across the room as if he already owned it. "Shame. Really. Nice little place." Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, worn, bound with a rubber band. "But I do," she said quietly. The room went silent. Darius turned, stunned. "Eleanor, what are you?" She held his gaze. Her voice shook but her words were steady. "My son died in that car accident 3 years ago. The settlement money, I've been carrying it for Ethan's future, for college, for a home, for something better than this life. But tonight it belongs here." She turned back to the man. "How much?" 43,000, he said slowly. His eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. "With interest, call it 50. Eleanor pulled the band loose, her hands trembling as she revealed stacks of bills. 50,000 exactly, she said. "Every penny I have." She began to count it out. "No," Darius said sharply, stepping forward. His voice was raw. "Eleanor, I can't let you." She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "You gave up everything to save Ethan's life. You spent your last dollar, money you needed for this place, because you could not bear to see him suffer." Her breath caught but she pushed on. "This money has sat in my purse for 3 years reminding me of what I lost. But this," she gestured around them. At the walls the drawings taped up by Ethan, the rooms above waiting to be lived in. This is what my son would have wanted. A family, a future. His memory lives here now. She placed the money on the counter with both hands. Take it, she said to the man. And don't come back. The collector's smug smile faded. He gathered the bills, counted them quickly, then looked back at them. Debt's clear, he said at last. Place is yours free now. He paused, something like respect crossing his face. Hell of a thing, standing by each other like that. Then he and his men left, their boots crunching on the snow outside until silence returned. The restaurant felt different the moment they were gone. Lighter, freer. Darius sank into a booth, staring at Eleanor as she calmly folded the empty envelope and slipped it back into her pocket. Why? He asked hoarsely. That money was all you had. All you and Ethan had. She sat across from him, her hands folded. No, she said softly. All we had was each other. The money was just paper. This, she looked around at the clean tables, the warm rooms, Ethan's drawings taped to the walls. This is what we have now. A home, a purpose, a future. Darius felt tears sting his eyes. I don't know how to repay you. You already have, she said. You gave us a family. From upstairs came the sound of Ethan stirring. His small voice called down. Are we still here? Did they take our home? Eleanor smiled, the first real smile of peace Darius had seen on her face. No, sweetheart, she called back. We're still here. We're all still here. Ethan's quick footsteps came down the stairs, his laughter echoing in the space. Darius watched him and felt something settle inside him. The restaurant was no longer his father's burden, or his own failing dream. It had become something new, a place where love was served with every meal, where strangers became family, where the lost could find their way home. Some things, he realized, cannot be measured in dollars. They can only be measured in sacrifice, and in the strength of standing together. And for the first time, he believed Carter's Kitchen might finally be exactly what it was meant to be. With the debt cleared and the threat gone, Carter's Kitchen began to change in ways Darius had never imagined. Eleanor moved through the space with steady determination, turning the upstairs rooms into a real home while keeping the restaurant running below. Ethan, his health restored, became the bright spirit of the place, greeting customers with such joy that even the grumpiest visitors left smiling. Word soon spread through the neighborhood about what had happened, how Darius had given his last dollar to save a sick child, how Eleanor had sacrificed her life savings to protect their new home. The story took on a life of its own. People came not just for food, but to be part of something rare, a place where love seemed worth more than money. The morning rush brought familiar faces and new ones alike. Mrs. Henderson from 3 blocks away began bringing her grandchildren every Sunday. The construction crew down the street made Carter's Kitchen their lunch stop. College students came for affordable meals that still felt like home cooking. More importantly, the restaurant became something the neighborhood had been missing, a sanctuary. On Saturday mornings, Darius opened early, not for paying customers, but for anyone who needed a warm meal. The homeless men who had once passed by the windows now had a corner table waiting. Single mothers came for free breakfasts before school. Elderly neighbors who lived alone found company over hot coffee. Eleanor managed much of this with quiet skill. She took over the books, stretching every dollar in ways Darius never could. She turned the back dining room into a community space. Afternoons brought children doing homework by the windows while Eleanor helped with reading, and Ethan shared his crayons. We're not running a charity, she told Darius one evening as they cleaned up after a busy day. We're running a family business, and families take care of each other. Darius paused, looking around the room. The walls now held not only Ethan's drawings but photos from customers, thank you notes, and messages from people whose lives had been touched. Near the door, a bulletin board displayed job postings, apartment listings, and offers from neighbors who wanted to give back. Your father would be proud, Eleanor said quietly. This place has heart again. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, and Eleanor retired upstairs, Darius sat in the restaurant alone, but it wasn't the lonely silence he had known before. It was the calm after a full day, the hum of a place loved and alive. He picked up one of Ethan's newest drawings. It showed the three of them in front of Carter's kitchen, surrounded by smiling customers. At the bottom, in uneven letters, the boy had written, "Our family restaurant, where everyone belongs." Darius smiled, and pinned it to the wall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he allowed himself to rest, surrounded by proof that they had built something worth keeping. 3 months later, Carter's kitchen had become a fixture of the community. On Christmas morning, they opened the doors to anyone who had nowhere else to go. The restaurant filled with neighbors sharing stories and laughter. Plates of turkey, potatoes and cornbread made their way to every table. For the first time in years, Eleanor said she hadn't felt alone during the holidays. One evening after closing, Ethan came running down from upstairs. His face glowed with excitement. "Dad, come see what Grandma Eleanor and I made." Darius followed him to the small kitchen table upstairs, where a scrapbook lay open. The pages were filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, drawings and notes. Ethan climbed onto his lap, and pointed proudly. "Here's the first picture I drew of us. And here's the article about how we help people. And these," he flipped the pages, "these are all the thank you cards." Eleanor smiled, and pointed to a photo. "This is my favorite." It showed the three of them on Christmas morning, surrounded by customers who had nowhere else to go. "That day," she said softly, "I felt like I belonged again." Darius studied the photo, remembering how worried he had been about not having enough food, only to see the room filled with joy. Ethan held up another drawing. This one showed the restaurant, with a small sign in the window. "The Carter Watson Family Restaurant." "When did you make that?" Darius asked. "I didn't," Ethan said seriously, "but I want to. We're a family now, all three of us. So it should have all our names." Eleanor's eyes glistened as she looked between the boy and Darius. "If that's what everyone wants," she said softly. Darius felt his chest tighten. He looked at these two people who had entered his life on the coldest night of the year, bringing nothing but their need, and somehow giving him everything he had been missing. "I can't think of anything I'd want more," he said. Ethan cheered and hugged him tight. "I'm making the sign tomorrow." Later, after Eleanor had helped Ethan to bed, Darius sat alone with the scrapbook. He turned through the pages slowly. Photos of Ethan's first day helping in the kitchen, Eleanor teaching reading lessons, community dinners, birthday celebrations, quiet moments of three people who had chosen each other as family. The last page was blank, except for Ethan's drawing and a note in Eleanor's neat handwriting. "Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other. Love doesn't require blood. It only requires open hearts and willing hands." This is the story of how three broken people became whole, and how a failing restaurant became a home for an entire community. Carter's Kitchen, where love is the main ingredient. Darius closed the book gently, and looked out the window at the street below. The neon sign glowed steadily now. Through the windows he saw the dining room ready for tomorrow. But more than that, he saw a life built on something stronger than profit. His father had been right. A restaurant wasn't just about food. It was about creating a place where people could find what they needed most: belonging. And as Darius prepared for bed in the home above the restaurant, he knew what success finally meant. It wasn't money. It wasn't awards. It was lives touched, hearts warmed, hope restored. Carter's Kitchen had become all of that. A place where every meal carried the weight of love, and every person who walked through the door found proof that kindness still existed. Because the best families, like the best restaurants, are built one meal, one moment, one act of love at a time. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.